What does literature do? Literary representations? It does more than the literary. It's not mere metaphors that we have. It remembers things which are not remembered. Very important, which are not remembered. So unremembering, it actually undoes the unremembering of the political discourses. Political discourse, the unremembering ta kore, সেটাকে subvert করে হতে literature. Literature subverts that unremembering. And it fills in the void that exists within the official history of partition. The official history of partition এর মধ্যে যে ফাঁকা জায়গাগুলো, সেই জায়গাগুলোকে fill up করে literature or literary narratives. Right. And in that way, we can actually we can extend this argument to say that literature is the museum, is that moving veritable museum of partition that was not there. যদি আমি বলি অমৃতসরে 2017 মিউজিয়াম হচ্ছে, কিন্তু তার আগের থেকে কিন্তু সাহিত্যটাই মিউজিয়াম that bears the traces of partition, that tells the story of partition, that tells the human element. And this telling is not, it does not give you data. It goes beyond the data. It does not give you what I call the arithmetic of violence. Violence at arithmetic, এতজনকে মারলো. This is not the thing that we get. What we get is a kind of an experiential information of partition, or we get to feel the viscerality of the trauma. We feel the trauma. We get to experience what these people went through, these nameless people went through, whose fate was decided in a very, very careless manner almost. So these are the things that literature brings into equation. So history again, what does it, if we look at history presents partition as a grand political event, leading to a grand political reconstruction. So we get to in the historical events, the focus is on a cartographic reconstruction. দুটো দেশকে cartographically map দিয়ে ভাঙা হলো. And we are talking about transfer of people, how many people got transferred. We get to know about the acts that were passed. We get to know about how what happened in what kind of partition happened in Punjab and what kind of partition happened in Bengal. Two different kinds of partition. We'll come to that later on. So these are two partitions whose nature was different. And different because if you look at from the historical perspective, in the form of data. And the data often says that there was less violence in Bengal and there was more violence in Punjab. But that can be debated because violence, again, as a historical documents give an arithmetic of violence, and that arithmetic needs to be recorded. Right. So here also comes the silences. So when literature, on the other hand, if we look at the grand political event as partition in official narratives, what does literature do? Literature focuses on the everyday experiences of partition. Everyday experience, what happened? Everyday experiences of partition, the experientiality and the visceral nature of trauma. The trauma take feel kora is something that you need to express. So how you cannot quantify trauma. And so what literature does is literature tries to portray that trauma. This portrayal is also problematic, we'll come to that, but it tries to portray, you feel the pain beyond, and you go beyond the data in that process. So what it does not provide a very clear-cut, black and white picture, representation of reality. For example, if you look into the stories of Manto, right, If you look into the stories of Manto, the good and the bad gets mixed. There's a famous story called Thanda Ghost. For those, many of you can go back home and read, or The Cold Meat, where the perpetrator of violence, the person who had actually committed the rape, suffers because he incidentally gets hold of a woman and commits that violence on a dead body. And when he realizes that, he himself suffers. That suffering, that moment of trauma gets expressed. So here, the perpetrator of the violence becomes also a person who suffers the trauma. So these black and white representations go away. Right, so when you look into the historical narratives, on the other hand, there is an attempt to create a protagonist and an antagonist in this entire historical discourse. So if you look into the basic school history books of India and Pakistan during this time, you will find that if you look into the Pakistan history books, the entire focus is on how a new nation was formed, Qaid-e-Azam by Qaid-e-Azam. Right. And how, in this part, how we'll find that very Muslim League is being vilified in Indian history books. So you'll find a kind of a blame game going on. So history books restrict themselves to a kind of a blame game. Right. Literature moves beyond it, or narratives go beyond it. It does away with the mathematical quality of violence, if we can say that, or the arithmetic of violence. Right. So we don't get the arithmetic. The kojon mara gelo, kojon raped holo, kojoner bari chhada holo. These are the things which are there in the historical records. Literature tries to read into these things. It becomes, and as a result of it, it becomes a rich repository of knowledge, not in terms of data, but in terms of affective information, documenting what actually happened on the emotional level. So you go from the level of data on information to the level of emotion. What emotive impact it had on the people. So therefore, literature brings a more nuanced perspective to partition. So this is why we should continue to read literature on partition, and this is why entire partition studies is flowering, and over the time, and when I am talking about literature of partition, we are not only talking about Indian writing in English, but a huge number of literature written in vernaculars, which we need to translate, we need to read, and written by people who have suffered, gone through that trauma, and those who have also, those who have heard about the trauma and writing on it, and how this trauma continues in the next generation, how it flows. So these are the literature.
There are many unwritten narratives.
And unwritten.
Oral narratives.
And oral narratives.
Traumas and pain and loss is there also in unwritten narratives.
And this unwritten narratives is something that we need to focus on. যেগুলো লেখা আছে সেগুলো তো we need to bring it. There are books which are not canonized in a way.
Yes.
Right. If you look into the selection of your books in your syllabus, you will find that many of the things are missing. Right. I'll come to that. If the missing link in the syllabus. Right. So coming to the things that I have said, now let's look at few of the texts, right, and how these things come in. We can start a bit with. So these are the things. So if we look at partition literature, we find a way it's potent in the sense that it actually challenges the official narratives in a many way. It moves you. Once you read it, it moves you emotionally. And it is subversive. This word is very important when you talk about partition literature. It subverts the notions. It subverts the official discourse. We can give examples of it. It highlights what has been forgotten, pushed into collectively produced amnesia. খুব collectively produced amnesia হচ্ছে ভুলে যাওয়া, collectively যেটা আমরা ভুলে গেছি. We'll see this very example. There is a collective amnesia কি সুন্দর কাজ করে. আমরা যখন অমিতাভ ঘোষ পড়বে সেখানে একটা জায়গা আছে, সেখানে we'll just read that section where this collectively produced amnesia takes place. And when he tries to find that event in the historical records, he searches and doesn't find it. তাহলে আমরা ঘটনাটা ওর কাছে কিন্তু খুব vivid, কিন্তু ইতিহাস অফিশিয়াল ডকুমেন্টেশনে নেই। সো দিস কালেক্টিভলি প্রডিউসড অ্যামনেশিয়া থেকে কিভাবে বেরোনো যায় সাহিত্য সেটা করে। It is disruptive in the sense that it questions the entire political project of unremembering. This I had mentioned before. যে এই যে পলিটিক্যাল প্রজেক্ট, এই জিনিসগুলো মনে রাখা উচিত নয়। This entire political যে effort সেটাকে কিন্তু সাবভার্ট করছে। This, let's see how we can here refer to the famous text that you have of Toba Teksin. Toba Teksin, if you look into Manto's writing is very journalistic in a way. Right, it has a style of what I call pseudo-journalistic writing. It's not like, we have, if you look into Partition literature in English or Partition literature, you'll find Mantor actor style. There is a very direct narration of the violence of partition. There is a very, the author is distanced. He just narrates it. It gives you almost a photographic picture of violence. And on the other hand, you have the magic realistic writing of Salman Rushdie. So these are the two ways in which the narrative structure brings in the partition stories. Right. Salman Rushdie is not in a syllabus, but do read Midnight's Children, because it talks about partition to emergency in a very, very unique way. So when you look at Toba Teksin, you have the text.
Yes.
I don't have the text. They prepare for it. I have it. I will just read a few of the lines.
They have very cold.
I'll refer to that. Look at this in this story. This story has a very pseudo-journalistic form of narration. It deals with. It's situated in an asylum in Lahore, and the government has decided, the two governments have decided that after partition, even the madman needs to have a nation. Right. So, madman having a nation, and it is done very seriously. And if you look at the historical documents of it, historical document of it, and it happened really. Amritsar, around 1949, 9/8, I'll give the data. Data is there. 49 একটা নতুন অ্যাসাইলাম তৈরি হয়। ওর ফাইনালি লাহোরে যে সবচেয়ে বড় অ্যাসাইলামটা ছিল, সেখান থেকে there is a transfer of lunatic people. Right. So how many were there? If you look at the historical documents, what does history take? Official documents talk about. It says the new hospital was set up on the ruins of a reformatory school in Amritsar, where a provision was made to receive 600 non-Muslim inmates of the labour asylum. Lahore থেকে 600 non-Muslim কে নিয়ে আসা হবে। The hospital in Amritsar started functioning on 1st March 1949. 1949 হচ্ছে finally 450 non-Muslim mental patients from the hospitals in West Pakistan, Lahore, Peshawar and Hyderabad were received at the Indian border on 6 December 1950 in exchange of 233 Muslim mental patients from across India. Of these 450 patients, 280 were sent to Amritsar And the remaining 168 non-Punjabi inmates were sent to Ranchi asylum. This is history. And this is the data that we get in history books. What impact does it have on us?
Arithmetic of displacement.
Arithmetic of displacement. We get numbers. Numbers which I have forgotten. যত অনেকবার পড়েছি কিন্তু ডেটটাও মনে থাকে না, নাম্বারটাও মনে থাকে না। But I remember the things. Right. So, a man. So here, if we look at the story, madness. He uses this trope of madness. We are thrown into a place where all are mad. And he uses madness as a kind of a biopolitical condition. I call it the biopolitical condition. You are biologically mad, so you have, when you are biologically mad, your perception, your cognition, you share an alternative cognition, which আমরা বলি পাগল, পাগলের মতন ভাবে, কিন্তু পাগলেরও তো ভাবনা আছে. So here we get an alternative cognition. And here madness is also political. If you look in the story, whatever was happening around, does that make sense? So here madness is on the biological level as well as on the political level. Whatever was happening in partition, সেটা কি খুব সুস্থ মস্তিষ্কের কাজ হচ্ছিল? The question that is raised, right? Now coming to the story, one thing. ঘটনা যখন শুরু হচ্ছে একটা জায়গায় এরকম somehow the information that partition is happening reaches the asylum and everybody starts talking about it. Right, interestingly একজন বলছে যে you know where is this place called Pakistan? আর তার উত্তর কি দিচ্ছে?
এটা ইন্ডিয়ার মধ্যে একটা জায়গা
না, where the cutthroat razors
Oh,
are
yeah.
made.
হ্যাঁ, a place where razor, it's a place in India where razor is made. Like wonderful absurd statement, right? Very absurd. But is it more absurd than the fact that we on 15th August we were dancing and celebrating the notion of India and Pakistan when the map of India and Pakistan was made on 17th August? ওটা কি আমরা কম পাগলামো করেছিলাম? যখন 14th অগস্টে নাচছিলাম জানি না কোনটা আমার দেশ, ম্যাপই তৈরি হয়নি. So is that not absurd? So here absurdity, what he does is he actually mixes, and if they are mad, what they are talking is total absurd. What the government is talking is it not absurd? Does it make real sense? The story goes on. এরকম কথা বলতে, and what does this man coming again? Toba Tek Singh is the name of a place. It's a place where this man wants to go to. A place about whom nobody knows. কেউ জানেই না জায়গা. And it does not exist probably. Right. And this non-existence is something that Manto focuses on. This non-existence, or I can call it a no place. No place, because places are made by governments here. India ke banatse. There are place is a matter of political discourse. The two grand discourse of place is there. One is that of India and another there's a Pakistan. And you have to choose. You are thrown into these two discourses. দুটো বাক্সের মধ্যে তোমাদের ফেলে দেওয়া হচ্ছে. And in between these two boxes resides this no place, or we can call the third space. The third space এ পৌঁছানো তোমার সম্ভব নয়, সম্ভব হয়. The license of reaching that place is only available to those who are mad. It's the madness of Toba Tek, of Bishan Singh, that makes him believe in that place. Otherwise, he cannot believe. So this was the irony of the situation. Right. What does, there is a repeated he goes on saying one certain sentence. Let's in Punjabi. Let's read that stuff. It's like
And
Upar di
it's
Bulbul.
changing with time. His repetition.
It's
Special.
the annex, the be, dhania, the moong, the dal, the lalangten. Gibberish. But if we try to translate it, what does it mean? It means that the gods up there, if we translate this Punjabi into English, it means that the gods up there are not bothered, and the dal here is decomposing. নিচে যে মুগ ডাল সেটা নষ্ট হয়ে যাচ্ছে আর ওপরে বসা ভগবানদের চিন্তাই নেই. This is what we can translate this gibberish into. This dal, if you look at this dal, because we read more people are students of literature, we read more into the lines. So this dal can be looked at as a symbol of domesticity, a symbol of everyday life, which suffered the most due to the decisions taken by those gods sitting in almost a Kafkaesque castles. ক্যাসেলে বসে দেশের যারা ডিসাইড করলো দেশটা ভাগ হচ্ছে তারা they are not bothered about the domestic life, about the everyday life of the common people. So this is what he talks about. আরেকটা জায়গায় এবার পাগলদের মধ্যে ননস্টপ কথা হচ্ছে গল্পে. একটা জায়গায় একজন মুসলিম লুনাটিক সে প্রচন্ড পাকিস্তান জিন্দাবাদ করছে, and in that excitement, in that হ্যাঁ করতে করতে ধাম করে পড়ে he falls. This moment, look at this moment. He believes in the discourse that is given by the government. So he consumes the discourse. আমি এটাকে যদি বলি তুমি খেয়ে নিলে, you consume the discourse like the thousands of people, millions of people who consume the discourse of India and Pakistan. And his falling down is also and is symbolical of how you consume the discourse, and at the same time you are consumed by the discourse. তোমাকেও কিন্তু কনজিউম করে নিল, তুমি পড়ে গেলে, তুমি আঘাত হলে, এইটাই হয়েছিল when we danced and celebrated the making of India and Pakistan, and then we suffered the atrocities. So we were consumed by that discourse. How this hyper-national discourses consume us. This entire physicality of this scene খুব symbolically এটা establish করে, the falling down of that madman while getting ecstatic about Pakistan. So this happens. Next, if you look at the two madmen talking, one section I really find interesting. সেখানেও বলছে if you come to এখানে বলছে later on now he began asking people where Toba Tik Singh was, for that was his hometown. ওই প্যারাগ্রাফের নিচে it had been rumored that Sialkot, which was once in Hindustan, was now in Pakistan. Who could say where Lahore, which was in Pakistan today, would be tomorrow, and was there anyone who could guarantee would be tomorrow, and was there anyone who could guarantee that both Pakistan and Hindustan would not disappear someday? So this incredulity towards the grand narratives, যে আজকে বলছে লাহোর ইন্ডিয়ার দানে পাকিস্তানে, পরের দিন যদি অন্য চেঞ্জ হয়, তারপর দুটো দেশে যদি একদিন হাওয়া হয়ে যায়, হতেই পারে. if suddenly the home that the place that you realized as home for years suddenly becomes an alien space, You never know when India would become something else, right? Or Pakistan can become something else. This is a strong political statement. And this strong political statement subverts the reality or the truth of grand narratives. India as a truth is constructed, or Pakistan as a truth is constructed. This very question is being raised. So, this goes on in the story. Next, we find that Bhishan Singh, a person from that unknown place called Toba Tek Singh, comes and visits Bhishan Singh. And they share experiences. বলে যে বাড়িতে ওর মেয়ের কথা বলে, সেখানে একটা জায়গা আছে যে সবার কথা বলতে বলে, ওর মেয়ের কথা ফাইনালি বলে ও থেমে যায়। একটা জায়গা আছে যেখানে মেয়ের কথা বলতে বলতে থেমে যায়। And so থেমে যাচ্ছে because he doesn't want to say what happened to her. And then he talks about the crops. He talks about how good the crops were. These are things which are not recorded in official histories. See the domesticity, the focus on the domesticity of the everyday life that was compromised, that was silenced. So ওই sectionটা is important. And coming to the last, if we the ending part is also very interesting. I'll just share that section that he had a daughter who was grown up now. As a child, she cried whenever she saw her father, and she continued to cry for him when she was a young man. When the disturbances began, Bhishan Singh started asking the people at the asylum where Toba Tek Singh was. And since he was unable to receive a satisfactory answer, his curiosity increased. His visits had also stopped. He had been able to sense the impending visits of his relatives, but now it seemed the little voice in his heart that had told him they were coming, that told him they were coming was stilled. So slowly, this idea of Toba Tek Singh as a place was disappearing, and the only person who was holding on to it was this madman, Bhishan Singh. And that finally, in the end of the story, that day comes when the madman will be separated. So, Garita Tola hotse, and this madman, we find Toba Tek Singh or Bhishan Singh refusing to choose any of the places. He stands on that no man's land and finally falls down. This falling down on this no man's land is a kind of an active reclaiming of that space. I will not go anywhere. And I will die believing that Toba Tek Singh exists. A third space can exist between the notion of India and Pakistan. Though the India and Pakistan are not the only alternatives. So he celebrates this falling down of Bhishan Singh is a kind of a reclaiming of the third space that might exist, that should exist.
And probably this might be his resistance.
His resistance, he subverts the narrative. That you don't, the very idea that you had no options, he questions that. But the irony is, you require to be mad to claim that space.
Yes.
If you are in your senses, you have no choice. But to accept the absurdity, the lunacy of the state powers. So this is what Toba Tek Singh is about. Now coming to when we talk about partition, and one thing that is focused, I'll go to the next text, and most of you have read also Kholdo. I will try to, one aspect of partition or one aspect of any kind of genocide, when we talk about genocide or mass killings, is the fact that the major amount of violence is directed towards women and children. And the same thing happened during partition. You have numbers almost diluted numbers of people, of women who were raped, who were abducted, and children who were killed. And what does the state do? এখানেও স্টেটের খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং একটা অ্যাটিটিউড আছে। And Ramayana and Ram were never absent when it comes to Indian politics. ঠিক আছে? So we have many of the women were abducted, raped or abducted, and government came up with a proposal called Abducted Persons Rehabilitation and Recovery Act. So the government decided that they will bring the abducted women back to their nation which has been selected by the powerhouses, by the government. So abducted women, their Pherotana was, and in the parliament, the metaphor that was given was straight taken from Ramayana, where it was said that Sita is in Sitaকে রাবণ নিয়ে গেছে, ও abduct করে নিয়ে গেছে, ও সীতাকে আবার রামরাজ্যে ফিরিয়ে আনতে হবে. Right. So this discourse of Ramayana and Ram was always there, and here also this idea is being introduced, and as a result, many governments went. There's a detailed list of abducted women's and their present situation, and they were almost forced to. They were asked to come back, and it was the duty of the patriarchal nation to save these women. Right. And this very attitude, patriarchal attitude towards the society, ironically led to the violence, because the very notion of respect of a community lies in the body, was marked in the body of a woman. So if you want to hurt a community, hurt their women, and that led to entire violence of women. And that very discourse was used when a abducted women, their anar discourse ta shuru holo. The rehabilitation minister used these very terms. You used Sita, the word Sita, and the abduction, and how the nation would take up this grand role of saving those women. So this was the political discourse. As a result of which, in history, আমরা রেকর্ডে দেখি যে প্রচুর মহিলাকে ফেরত আনা হয়. There is two stories here. So, যখন literature, how does literature approach this issue? Literature আমরা দুটো ন্যারেটিভ দেখি, দুরকম স্টাইলে লিটারেচার চলে. We can very loosely divide into two sections. One, where rape or physical violence is the central focus of the story. তুমি চামান নাহাজ আজারি পড়ো, কিষণ চন্দ্রের লেখা পড়ো, মান্তর লেখা পড়ো, সেখানে অনেক জায়গায় rape is the central focus of the story. But there is another narrative, other kind. There are some stories where rape is the beginning, and then we find how the woman who has suffered that transgression, who have gone through that hellish experience, deals with reality. And here I will refer to one story by you might read. This is Jamila Hashmi's Banished. It's a very small story, but very, very, very subversive, and that challenges the very this paternalistic role of the nation and its duty to retrieve and save the abducted woman. Here, again, the beginning of the story is the incident of rape is used as a starting point, where from the story begins to portray the negotiation of the female subject with the outer and the inner world. So here, there is this lady who has been abducted, and she has been taken to the house of the abductor. ও abductor বাড়িতে ওকে রেখে দেওয়া হয়েছে। সে abductor মেয়েটিকে নিয়ে তার মাকে বলছে, see, you don't have to work anymore. I have brought a maid servant for you, and she will stay with us. And she continues to stay. And slowly and steadily, she continuously remembers the trauma. Though the situation changes slowly. She develops a friendly relationship with the abductor's mother. And there is a kind of a marriage that also happens. So, and the mother-in-law almost praises this lady in front of other people, says, "Tomader baite to bowe shashurte jhamela hoy." Here, she is so wonderful. But in spite of that, she continuously remembers that she has been transgressed. She refuses to forget. Again, this unremembering, she resists this unremembering. And continually she feels that someday her brother would come and take her away from this place. See, Ram coming and saving Sita. This entire discourse is being used here. And she gives birth to a girl called Munni. And slowly she finds that in her relationship with Munni, she could handle the trauma. So here, in the story, mothering becomes a trope. Mothering becomes a kind of a balm to the pained heart of this lady. So she slowly, the girl grows up and she settles down in this house. And one day, a letter comes that and a list of abducted women come, and the name of this lady is in that list. Take ebar pherot jete hobe. Now, when she has settled in this life, what she does? She refuses to go. So here, Sita, the metaphorical Sita, decides to stay back with the abductor and resists or almost questions this patriarchal duty of the nation. So these are stories which are silenced. We don't get it. We only get numbers of women who were reconciled to their nations. We get a list of abducted women, but we don't get these stories. These are human stories that we get in literature. So Jamila Hashmi is banished, and with this we can connect your Leaf in the Storm, Lalitha Anthaljaman's short story. Leaf in the Storm, where again mothering is used as a way to survive the trauma, to overcome the trauma. He brings in a very interesting element. Because of rape and violence, many women got pregnant. And what they do, so they were bearing the stress of trauma in their womb. And in the story you will find the protagonist is in a camp. In a camp where she is pregnant, and she is suffering from the dilemma whether to abort this baby, because this baby bears the stress of the violence that she has suffered, the transgression that she had to suffer, and this trauma is being represented. And finally, her decision to save the child is almost a kind of a wish fulfillment. We don't know what would happen to the kid. Right. And the ending, we can just, I'll just try to read the last lines, which I find very, very, almost too good to be real. Let's remember again that line, the last line of this short story. As the mother walks slowly towards the camp. So at midnight, the baby is born. As the mother walks slowly towards the camp, the stars beamed from heaven. Maybe they had resolved a complicated puzzle. Maybe they had resolved the complicated puzzle. So this was the puzzle of whether to give up the baby, or where can mothering be a way of coming out of this violence, of this traumatic experience. We don't know what happens to the baby, but the story ends on a very positive note. And when it's I'd like to digress a bit. The same thing happened with in Pakistan, in West Pakistan during the liberation, East Pakistan during the liberation war. There was this mass violence on women again. বাংলাদেশে প্রচুর মহিলাদের রেপ করা হয় রাজাকাররা, আর দেখা যায় যে what the problem comes in these camps when babies were born. What to do with these babies? They were called the war children. War children of Bangladesh. And what was done? Many of them were relocated to Canada. And Canada, Mexico, এরকম জায়গায় তাদেরকে রিলোকেট করে দেয়,
অ্যাডপ্ট করে
হ্যাঁ অ্যাডপ্ট করানোর জন্য ওখানে পাঠিয়ে দেওয়া হয় যাতে নেশন গেটস ফ্রি, mainly through missionaries. And there's a wonderful work I think going on where there's a field work going on where the oral narratives of these kids are being recorded, and how and their idea of Bangladesh. So what children experience record kora is a ongoing wonderful work that is going on. So we also don't know what happened to these children who were born in the rehabilitation camps, in the refugee camps. The story though ends on a very positive note. So Jamila Hashmi is banished, and Lalitambika Antharjaman's Live in the Storm can be a very good starting point when you talk about women and partition. And now
shall we take a tea break after 20 minutes?
Yes. Last phase এর ভিডিওটা যখন করব তার if students permit. So now when we again talk about partition, one thing that we need to remember is we should not be mixing the two partitions. Right. The partition that happened in Punjab and the partition that happened in Bengal. তার দুটো কারণ হচ্ছে, প্রথম একদিকে যে দুটো নেচার আলাদা. There was a very limited period of immense violence in Punjab, and there was a transfer of huge number of people within a small span of time. And it was very, very visible. The government was ready for it. There were refugee camps ready to bring in those refugees, give them place, give them areas of settlement. These were all almost expected. But when it came to our part of Bengal, Indian government or West Bengal government did not have a clue that so many people would be coming. If you read the newspapers of that time, Dwijendralal Rai barbar bolchen je there's a huge population, Hindu population in East Pakistan, and they are so well settled that I don't think many of them would be coming. So, and in fact, if you look at 46, 47 and 46 থেকে যখন লোক আসা শুরু করছে, খুব কম লোক আসছে, 47 এ আসছে in the first group of refugees who came had almost all of them have had some establishments in West Bengal.
এবং স্যার মানে পাঞ্জাবের ক্ষেত্রে এটা মানে একবারই এসেছিল, এখানে বারবার আসা
শুরু হলো 46 থেকে,
হ্যাঁ
চলছে 72 অবধি, ঠিক আছে দিকে। And
বাংলাদেশে যখন গঠন হয় তখন অনেকে চলে এসেছে,
অনেকে এসেছে। সেকেন্ড গ্রুপ অফ রিফিউজিস কাম আফটার 72, হিউজ নাম্বার অফ পিপল। তো প্রথমে কি when government is not ready, so what does government do? They don't accept you as refugees. এটা প্রবলেম হবে যে রেফিউজি হিসেবে আমি তোমাকে দেখবই না, আই উইল নট look at you as refugees, so I will not give you any government support. So this was extremely pathetic. So we have to, there was a definition যে কাদের কাদের রিফিউজি বলা হবে, and this with as time continued, 47 এ একরকম, 49 এ গিয়ে একরকম, 50 তে একরকম, we find that it goes on changing, extending the definition of refugee because people were continuously coming. And when we talk about Bengal partition, and whenever we talk about partition, one thing that we forget, we elide over, we just refuse to accept or probably refuse to see that there was an element of caste also involved with partition. Caste a boro role play করেছে কিরকম? Our nation was divided by caste. And when it comes to West Bengal, if you see, and the way the rehabilitation was done, we'll find that upper class Hindu people, তার rehabilitation একরকম. If we look into the low class people or scheduled caste people, because at that time Bangladeshe almost 800,000 SC people were there. তাদের settlement অন্যরকম. So this caste factor is also important. What happened? How the entire rehabilitation program was decided on the basis of caste. If you look at the upper caste people, all got their establishment in and around Kolkata. Baliganj, Jadavpur, you will find the establishment. Jabardakhl colony bolo. এখানে যারা establish করছে, majority of them belong to the upper caste. Initially. Next, and even the fact was, initially যারা আসছেন তারা কিন্তু upper caste আসছে. The low caste people were decided to stay back because there was no such mass violence happening. There was violence happening in quarters, but violence was not there in a mass level initially. So they decided to stay back. See, because they had their establishments there. Because most of them were agriculture, fishermen, and they stayed back. But when things got worse, they started coming in flocks. And what happened? What the government did, they crowded Shialda and Howrah stations. They were taken in trucks to camps outside Kolkata. Camps which are pretty nearby. আমাদের জায়গার কাছাকাছি অনেকগুলো আছে. একটা কুপার্স ক্যাম্প রানাঘাট, one of the few camps which was run by central government. These were called transit camps. So initially they were taken to transit camps. The campগুলো inhuman condition এ রাখা হয়েছে. If you need to know about them, read works of Manoranjan Bapari, who gives a vivid description of these camps. So inhuman, a place which is dirty. There is no sanitary situations there. People dying of diseases, and minimum government support. And then, from transit camps, they were sent to refugee camps in Birbhum. And by 1949, Bidhanchandra realizes that things are getting out of hand, and Bengal cannot accommodate so many refugees. So what does Bidhanchandra? What we find that Bidhanchandra starts writing letters to central government to rehabilitate these refugees to other parts of the nation. And the places that were chosen were Orissa, Malkhanganj area, Andhra এই জায়গাটা দণ্ডকারণ্য, the place was called Dandakaranya, a camp called Mana camp there, and Andaman Island. So, and you'll find that if you look into the list of people, just if you look at the list of people who were sent to these camps, one thing, if you look at it minutely, we'll find that almost 90% of these people belong to lower castes. 80% of them were Nomoshudras. So see the caste aspect of partition. This is something that we don't keep much focus on. So caste was a deciding factor when it comes to rehabilitation process. Right. And rehabilitating them in these places was a challenge, because Orissa, the people who came from Bangladesh, tara basically, because it's a very, they were living in a very fertile land. Most of them were agriculturists, and they were used to almost a Gangetic valley, and they were thrown into places which were unfertile, very, very inclement weather conditions, very dry, where they could not sustain themselves. So this choice of place was also done in a very callous manner. And as a result of which we find that many refugees come back. They were called deserted refugees. They deserted the camps, and government would not take any responsibility. They had to, they came back, stayed on the streets, and finally they also tried to relocate themselves in Sundarbans at a place called Morijhapi. Do read Amitabh Ghosh a bit to know about Morijhapi, because after Amitabh Ghosh on Portsoy, do try to read Hungry Time. Right. What happened in Morijhapi? Anybody knows what happened in Morijhapi? See how we do this. This is collective amnesia. Morijhapi bole ekta chotto island Sundarbanse, refugees who returned from Dandakaranya, who were unable to sustain themselves in that place, decided to inhabit this small island called Morijhapi, stay there, and without any government support, created an ecosystem for themselves. They created schools, they started getting clear water, চাষ করতে শুরু করলো without any government support. But that place was under the wild, under Sangli, because it's a part of the national park. You cannot inhabit that island. And the government, West Bengal government, the government which was at that time was the communist government, who came to power because the refugees backed them in a big way, who fought for the refugees. Jara so-called Sorboharar Sarkar, what did they do? They gave them orders to leave that island, and when they refused, killed all of them. Sent police, sent the West Bengal police, and there was a fight between the refugees and the government, and most of them were killed. And we don't find any reports. So go search for that in the newspapers. Newspaper archives আছে, গিয়ে একবার দেখবে ওই সময়টা কোনো খবর নেই. The only news that is there is given by Times of India, which was published in Bombay. Otherwise there is no news. আনন্দবাজার পত্রিকা একটা কথাও নেই. Right. See how collective amnesia is produced by the state. And there was an interesting study, the Morijhapir pore, the tigers in Sundarbans became more man-eaters. You know why? Because the government killed those refugees or wounded those refugees, took them in their launch, and threw them into the jungle, where the tigers came and ate them. And from then onwards, it's a very interesting study by Anu Jale, an anthropologist, who says that the entire mental setup of tigers changed because they got human flesh so easily. And human-tiger conflict became a major issue after the Murshidabad incident. This part of history we really don't know. There is no and the only literature that is there is probably a new book that has been published called Blood Island. It had to put the I have forgotten the name, but it has a very vivid description of Murshidabad. So Murshidabad was there, and there was this Andamans. So I guess we can take and this settlement in Andamans is a place where I visited just 1 month back. So I will share a few videos that I could collect of oral testimonies of people and the experiences they had while traveling. I was actually trying to locate a group of people of around 50 families যারা পশ্চিমবঙ্গ থেকে SS Maharaja করে 1955 Andamanse আসে, and they are relocated to a small village called Togapur in Middle Andamans. So I went there and had the opportunity to interact with them, and they belong to a certain, they followed a certain sect called Motua religion. Most of them were Motuas. And I went there, I had the opportunity to participate in one of the events. Incidentally, আজকে যখন তোমাদের এখানে বলছি, আন্দামানে আজকের দিনে হরিচাঁদ ঠাকুরের গুরুচাঁদ ঠাকুরের জন্ম তিথি সেলিব্রেট হচ্ছে. I was there this very day last year in that Togapur village. So it gets connected. So we can take a break and we can finish up with that video. Thank you for listening. I'll just share my experience of this place. Andaman se from 1949 থেকে শুরু করে till 1960s 64 এও থেকে এই মাইগ্রেশন এই রিহ্যাবিলিটেশন প্রসেসটা শুরু হচ্ছে. Indian government took this scheme was called colonization of Andaman. Colonization of Andamans. This was the name that was given. This project was called Colonization of Andamans. And Andaman was a place that was initially we associated with what? There is a wonderful Netflix Kalapani. So it has been whenever we connect with think of Andamans, we think about Kalapani, we think of what else we think of?
লিটারেচারের দিক থেকে সবুজ বনের রাজা
যারা একটু কম মানে আমাদের মতন এত এরুডাইট না, তারা আমরা এরুডাইট, আমরা এসব বলি, যারা কম জানে মানে মানে এই আন্দামান বলতে ট্রাভেল ইয়েস, আর মানে আন্দামানের সিম্বল মানে কিছু কিছু জায়গায় সিম্বল থাকে না, মানে আগ্রা বলতে আমরা তাজমহল, সেলুলার জেল, ভেরি গুড. তো সেলুলার জেল আর কি বুঝি? জারোয়ারা, এই রাটা কি সেটা জানি না, ঠিক আছে? তো শুধু জারোয়া মানে না, সত্যি আমরা জানি না আমরা কজন করকম ওখানে মানে the inhabitants, the natives of Andamans করকম আছে, we don't know.
Ra is the term which actually shows our ignorance.
Ra is that silence. The sound of silence হচ্ছে Ra. ঠিক আছে? Ra is basically আরো 4 রকম ট্রাইব, মানে basically Centenaries, Onge, Jaroas and Greater Andamanese. These are the 4 tribes that used to inhabit Andamans. And officials and prisoners are there. This was the basic idea, this was the basic demography of Andamans. So when Andaman was chosen as a place to rehabilitate, it was not a very, what I call a project which was thought to it was not a welfare project. don't take it as a welfare project. The government realized that there was huge amount of natural resources which needed to be used, and you could get easy labor by rehabilitating those refugees. So this was the government basic plan behind the colonization process. So rehabilitation, so what was, if we আমরা যদি দেখি যে বিধান চন্দ্র রায় got this when this information reached Bidhan Chandra Rai, he jumped for it. He sent letters that we should be given the first opportunity, because our West Bengal is getting flooded by the refugees. We cannot give them rehabilitation, so give us maximum space. And it was said that those who will be going to the Andamans will be seen as pioneers. Pioneers who would create a new state, a new place. So they were eulogized by the state. Oh, we have, আমার ছবিটা নেই, সেখানে একটা যুগান্তরে ছবি বেরিয়েছিল যে যারা ফার্স্ট গ্রুপ অফ রিফিউজিস 49 এর লাইন দিয়ে দাঁড়িয়ে আছে, যেরকম ক্রিকেট টিমের ছবি থাকে না, জেতার পরে চ্যাম্পিয়ন্স, ওরকম ভাবে সবাই দাঁড়িয়ে একটা ছবি। So, and যুগান্তরের ফার্স্ট পেজে ছবিটা উঠেছিল, and it was said that these are নতুন যুগের আগন্তুক, এরকম কিছু একটা টাইটেল দেওয়া আছে। They go to this place and they settle there. And I was actually, in my focus was, as I said, was on a certain group of people who went to this place in 1955. They were almost the second group of refugees. Initially, South Andaman se, so first group of refugees was South Andaman, যেটা পোর্ট ব্লেয়ার জায়গাটা, যেটা টুরিস্ট এলাকা, সেইখানে প্রথম জনরা থাকে। And if you go up to the Andamans, these are places which were like we have huge big forests, and there are no roads, and uninhabited. Major section is uninhabited till date. So second phase started with cleaning of these places and relocating these people. So, and মনে রাখতে হবে যে প্রথমে মানুষদের কাছে কিন্তু it was not acceptable, because the first thing you say, মানে তো when refugees were given the offer to go to Andamans, they said কালা পানিতে আমাকে পাঠাচ্ছ, আমি কি চোর? হ্যাঁ, মানে ওখানে গেলে ফেসে গেলাম তো, আই এম landlocked, ঠিক আছে? So they would not go. So what they did, an interesting thing. Rehabilitation process-এর একটা ছিল যে কাউন্সেলিং। তো কাউন্সেলিং কি করে হতো? They used to show pictures of the place where you were supposed to be. So you like the place. If you don't like the place, you can say no. And then comes the next effort to convince you. So what did this do? This is not a verifiable fact. I got this information from one of the people, or one of my respondents, who said that interestingly, the video that was shown to the people in the refugee camps was of a very green place, where there were rivers, fields, যেখানে চাষবাস হচ্ছে, শস্য শ্যামলা, which brings back the memory of their Bangladesh, of their home, their body. And this was not a picture of the Andamans. This was a video of Kerala. Kerala খুব মানে বাংলাদেশের মতনই, কিন্তু আমাদের তো কেরালার কিছু ছবি দেখানো হয় পশ্চিমবঙ্গের মতনই রাখে, কিছু কিছু পার্ক যেখানে চাষ হয়, নদী আছে। This was there, and they went, and I was tracking a group of 50 families who were transported to a place called Togapur in a ship called SS Maharaja. in 1955, and they got settled in this place called Togapur in Middle Andamans, which is almost 110 kilometers from south from Port Blair. You can imagine 1955 and the Middle Andamans, not infested with wild animals. Wild animals, they were basically deers and elephants. Elephants ki kore Andamane gelo is a story of its own. Right? Hathi ki kore pahunchalo, and there are an elephant is a problem in Assam, basically. Right. I'll come to that. It was a British legacy, basically. British governments took elephants in ships and used them to take that heavy logs from one place to the other. And after some day, when the British went away, they left the elephants in Andamans. They copulated, and the mass number of wild elephants became, and there was nobody to kill them. আর ওই জন্য এলিফ্যান্টস বেড়ে গেল। আর একটা জিনিস বাড়লো, সেটা হচ্ছে হরিণও ছেড়েছিল। ব্রিটিশরা একটু হরিণ টরিণ লাগে তো শিকার টিকার করতে, হরিণও নিয়ে গেছিল, হরিণও ছেড়ে দিয়েছে। And you can well imagine a place where you have deers without tigers. What happens? So again, problematic food chain. So you have deers and a place which is infested with deers, elephants, very dangerous snakes, crocodiles, and these people were expecting green fields, right? And they suddenly reach this place. And what happens is a tale that we don't know. It is a tale that needs to be documented. A tale, I guess, majority of which has been lost because the people who documented it in their body are gone. Right. In this village, I got at least only 10, I got to interact with 10 or 9 or 10 people who had a memory of that, who were the first generation people who got settled. And one unique thing I felt, and এই লিস্টটা যখন আমি জোগাড় করলাম যারা যারা গেছে ওখানে পৌঁছেছে, this list of 50 families, I realized that out of these 50 families, almost 49 families belonged to the lower caste, specifically Namashudras. So this, I was talking about the caste factor in rehabilitation process. So there was no Bhattacharya's and Mukherjee's going. Bhattacharya's and Mukherjee's were very well settled in and around Kolkata, writing their sad stories of their nostalgic home in Bengal. And here we have these Vyaparis and Bishas, Prochur. All these people fighting for their life in a place which nobody knows about. So, and how they settle. And I found an interesting common factor here. How they survive. Without government support, much government support. They survive because of a feeling of community. A feeling of community that came out because of a faith, Vishwas. A faith because majority of these Namashudra people were supporters or believers in Motua religion. And how this belief in their religion and the cultural practices that are connected with this sect, Horishabha, or Kirtan, or the annual festivals, how these performance of these cultural activities created a bond between them. When they were fighting with the witches and the deers infesting their agricultural land, and every Wednesday when they used to meet and sing about their about their God and think about Bangladesh, this collective thinking would give them support. So how, and as a result, they provide a new perspective to the entire study of refugee studies. For me, refugee studies is marked by nostalgia, a sense of loss. But here, you don't find that sense of loss. One person wonderfully explained that হরি আমার মনে, তো আমি যেখানে যেখানে হরি সেখানেই আমি, আমার বাড়ি তো হরিতে। তো this very belief led them to come out of their sense of nostalgia, sense of suffering, and create a sense of community to fight with all the odds and survive successfully. And Andaman is a successful rehabilitation project, not because of the government, but because of these people from the dregs of the society who came together, fought for existence, backed by their faith. This is a story that needs to be told. So I just end with one. I had a talk with this aged lady who was also, if you look into the Motua religion, they have dolls, right? That dolopati hai. So this lady is interesting to one of the dolopatis, very rare case where a woman is a dolopati. Right, because her husband was a dolopati, and after he died, she took up the reins. And she is talking about her experience. And you will find one thing interesting is the language that she speaks. The language, the dialect that she speaks. And you will find that dialect is, she bears the traces of her past. যে ভাষাটা বলছে সেটা বাংলাদেশে বাঙাল ভাষা 1955 থেকে এখানে ওখানে আছে, কিন্তু আমাদের নেক্সট জেনারেশন কিন্তু বাঙাল হলেও বাংলাটা ঠিক বলতে পারে না, কিন্তু this is how the memory is carried on. Right. So let's do not much of talking to that. Sound আছে? I don't know how the sound will work.
সাউন্ড নেই মানে ছিল না এতে, এখন আসছে।